Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cameron Wiggins, and I'm a retail food specialist within the Office of State Cooperative Programs, and I'm located out of the Office of Atlanta. We have a pretty full schedule agenda today, so I want to jump right into it. Our next presentation will be about cannabis and cannabis-derived products, including CBD at the retail level. Please help me welcome Dr. Kristi Muldoon Jacobs, who is the Deputy Director in the Office of Food Safety at CFSAN, which is the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition within FDA. Please note that all speakers have full bios and headshots on the meeting's Pathable website under the People section, so you can learn more and connect with any of them, as well as any other attendees during the break or after this session. So right now, I'll turn it over to Dr. Muldoon Jacobs for our next topic. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Cameron. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. Yes, thank you. As Cameron mentioned, my name is Kristi Muldoon Jacobs. I am the Deputy Director at the Office of Food Additive Safety at the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. I'd like to start off by thanking the organizers for inviting us to talk about this topic, which in our experience tends to generate a lot of attention and interest. With that, we'll just, let me make sure I know how to control this. Yes, there we go. Just a bit on the run of show, so everyone's aware of what to expect. I expect about a 40-minute presentation today, hopefully leaving plenty of time at the end for some of your questions. I'd like to start by introducing the programs at the Office of Food Additive Safety, OFAS, which is responsible for ensuring that substances added to food are safe, and talk a little bit about how we determine safety. Then we'll transition to CBD directly, some of the external factors that have impacted our programs, and the presence in food products. Before we dig in, I'd like to, oops, I went too far. Hold on a second. Yep. Whoop. Sorry, it's a little touchy. Hold on. Giving everyone a little bit of a preview here. There we go. Now, before we dig in, I'd like to describe a bit of the food ingredient universe to you. It's pretty broad in scope, and food ingredients comprise both direct as well as indirect food additives. Some examples of direct food additives include sweeteners, colors, preservatives, these sorts of things that one generally is first to think of when you think of something that would be added to food. Although not the focus of the presentation today, indirect food additives also fall within the universe of food ingredients, and these are often referred to as food contact materials and encompass any substance that becomes part of food through the nature of its use, such as food packaging and processing equipment. There's also some special and unique examples that you don't generally think of that are part of this universe, such as food irradiation equipment, just through the way the definition in the Act works. But there is also a unique and special class of food ingredients that are often referenced within the food regulatory community, and this is GRAS, or generally recognized as safe. This is a specified definition and carve out in the Act for some food ingredients that can meet this definition. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. I'd also like to take a note and look at what's not included in this slide. And these are dietary ingredients used in dietary supplements. While these are technically food, they are a special subset, and there are special food regulations that are distinct, and they're regulated under a special section of the Act referred to as DSHEA. This will not be the focus of the presentation today, although I may include a few highlights as we move through. Okay. So all of these types of ingredients are regulated through programs, with the exception of dietary supplements that are administered by the Office of Food Additive Safety, OFAS. With such a broad scope and diverse set of substances and an important safety mandate, it's important that we have established programs and processes to ensure efficiency and regulatory reliability. But I would be remiss to leave out that this is a highly dedicated and expert group of staff driven by its public health mission. We have about 125 highly trained FTEs with advanced educations in the fields of toxicology, chemistry, food science, nutrition, molecular, and microbiology, to name a few. So within the office, I'd like to take a minute to talk about the submissions and the general responsibilities. Oops, my goodness. Sorry, everyone. This is tricky. It's a bit touchy. Okay, there we go. Take a minute to talk about the amount of submissions and the general responsibilities for our office. The office is organized by product and process types. We have 3 divisions: the Division of Food Ingredients processes GRAS notices, color additive petitions, and food additive petitions. The Division of Food Contact Substances processes food contact notifications and inquiries or issues related to indirect food ingredients. And the Division of Science and Technology is a unique group that deals with some of the cutting edge programs to incorporate knowledge management approaches, apply new methodologies, along with providing consultations for some of the new innovative food industry technologies, such as biotech, genetically engineered plants, and food derived from cell culture technologies. It's a very interesting area that we unfortunately will not be focusing on today. But as you can see, our programs are very popular with industry, and the number of submissions are growing. The graph shown here reflects the number of submissions by each program area that are received as complete. I'd note this only represents a fraction of the work, because many submissions received have some deficiencies that are identified during sort of a pre-screening phase and are therefore not accepted for review. So as you can see, this is an enormous amount of work for a relatively small group, and it's continuing to grow over time. So I want to reference a note to where the FDA authority to regulate these food ingredients comes from. The Food Additive Authority is specifically identified and defined within Section 201 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. The Act specifically defines the term food additive as any substance, the intended use of which results or may reasonably expected to result directly or indirectly in its becoming a component or otherwise affecting the characteristics of food. I want to draw your attention to the specific exclusion in this definition of GRAS, or generally recognized as safe. You'll also note that this definition does not apply to pesticide chemicals, new animal drugs, or those substances that meet the definition of a dietary ingredient and a dietary supplement as defined in Section FF, dietary ingredients and dietary supplements, for which I referred to earlier. So let's talk a little bit about GRAS versus food additives. Even though the Act excludes GRAS substances from the definition of a food ingredient, the Act also defines what it means to be GRAS. Oh my goodness, these slides, I'm sorry, somehow it keeps bouncing around. Okay, this is where I intend to be. Even though the Act excludes GRAS substances, it does provide a definition. If the substance is generally recognized among qualified experts by scientific training and experience to evaluate its safety as has been adequately shown through scientific procedures, or in the case of a substance used in food prior to January 1st, 1958, through either scientific procedures or experience based on common use in food to be safe. This allows for a determination of safety by general consensus, as opposed to a decision made by FDA and promulgated through rulemaking. Let's see if I can make this work. Okay. So, even though the Act excludes GRAS substances from the definition of a food additive, the Act also, even though, excuse me, everyone, I'm having a little bit of a technical challenges here today. Even though GRAS and the food additive processes have some distinctions, it's important to understand what makes them the same. And this is going to become relevant later through the talk. The elements include the considerations of the data reviewed, as well as the definition of safety. For all food ingredients, including direct, indirect, and GRAS substances, they must meet the reasonable certainty of no harm safety standard. This is the highest bar for safety. This is a determination that does not include a risk-benefit analysis, as might be the case in drugs. There should be a demonstration of an absence of risk for foods. That makes sense, right? Food should not necessarily be risky. The information that should be considered to establish that substances meet the safety standard is the same for both food additives and GRAS substances. This includes a fair evaluation of all the data with an understanding that there is an absence of complete knowledge. As scientists, we understand and expect that new information and a biological understanding will advance, and we need to make determinations at a moment in time. And this is what is done when we review all of the available information to make the determination if a substance meets that definition of safe, reasonable certainty of no harm. It's worth noting that the dietary supplement standards are distinct, and the standard for dietary supplements is a reasonable expectation of safety, which is not the same as a reasonable certainty of no harm. And that's why we're keeping that one a bit aside for this presentation today. So let's kind of take a little bit of a deeper look at the information considered to establish safety. While we acknowledge that there's an absence of complete information and knowledge, there is some information that's expected to be provided or to be available that would inform the safety decision. FDA has published several guidances that are overarching for food ingredient determinations, as well as specific guidance for each of these programs. We're looking for data that can answer questions such as, what is the substance and how much of it will there be in food? What is the specific intended use of this substance? And is it safe at that level for that intended use? For all programs, it's the responsibility of the petitioner or the notifier to establish safety. Here. So if we look a little bit more at the type of data that are generally provided, these are provided in two distinct sections of a notice. In terms of chemistry, data that can identify the identity, the composition of the additive or the substance, including any impurities that might expected to be present, the manufacturing method, the stability of the substance, the specific physical and chemical specifications, the proposed use levels, and analysis methodology in food. So we're looking at, under the intended use conditions, what would be the maximum amount, a maximum authorized level or the maximum use level in the determination of GRAS to come up with an estimated daily intake or a cumulative EDI value. That information is in the chemistry section and reviewed by chemistry experts. The information in the toxicology or safety section of the review includes full reports of toxicology and safety studies, including all the primary data. And this is used to review and establish a no observed adverse effects. What is the effect of the substance in which no adverse effects would be observed? And these data with additional safety factors are used to derive what is referred to as an acceptable daily intake. And this is an amount of a substance that one could be expected to consume over their entire lifetime without experiencing any adverse effects. So I want to take a look really at the amount and the type of toxicology data that's provided in these substances. It is really a robust review in many cases, and the type of toxicity studies that are recommended to support the safety is determined on a case-by-case basis. Recommendations are driven by the recommendations for the type and the amount of data are largely driven by the expected exposure. But the type of data that's generally necessary and considered in a toxicology review is pretty extensive. Genetic toxicity, metabolism, animal studies that include both short-term and long-term studies, developmental and reproductive studies are generally often recommended depending on what's observed in some of the other studies. Generally, carcinogenicity studies and neurotox studies are available. In addition to the non-clinical data, a lot of new approaches are used, including structure-activity relationships to look at doing bridging and read across. If there's any human clinical data, that can be considered. And as we advance into new methods of safety assessment, more and more in vitro toxicology data is pulled in to inform the full safety assessment for a substance. And in totality, all of this information is reviewed so to establish these two critical data points that are used in the decision making. That's the ADI, the acceptable daily intake, and the EDI. When the ADI and the EDI are compared, ideally to reach a reasonable, not ideally, in all cases, to reach a reasonable certainty of no harm, the EDI should be below the ADI value. That is, the exposure from the expected use of the substance is going to be lower than the acceptable daily intake that's been established by the data. So now that we've looked at what is the same in terms of how the amount of data, that data is reviewed, the reasonable certainty of no harm safety standard applies to all food ingredients, whether they be direct, indirect, or GRAS, and that the responsibility for establishing that data and making that for ensuring that anything put onto the market is the responsibility of the manufacturers. I just wanted to take a look and say, well, what makes GRAS and the food additive pathway unique? And the main difference, because we've already gone through that the data needed to establish safety and the safety standard are the same for all of these. What makes GRAS unique is the general recognition element. The general recognition element distinguishes the GRAS standard from the food additive standard. So what does that mean? That means that the available information for safety needs to be publicly available, and experts qualified have to generally accept that it can meet that safety standard. So GRAS requires not just a demonstration of safety, but also a general recognition in as determined by experts that this substance would be safe. So the food additive pathway would require the data. That data would be submitted to FDA for review. FDA experts would review that data information. That substance could be approved and it would be listed in the federal notice as approved food additive for that specific use. In the context of GRAS, all of that evidence of safety must be generally available. And then it must be generally accepted upon the review of experts to meet that safety standard of a reasonable certainty of no harm. And then one would conclude that that substance is then GRAS. So has CBD been approved as a food additive? We've just painstakingly gone through what it means to be an approved food additive. And we know we're seeing a lot of CBD products out there. So one would wonder, has CBD been approved? And in short, the answer is no. So then, is CBD grass? And again, the short answer is no. FDA considers when CBD is added to food, it would be an unapproved food additive. And while FDA has not received a notification from a notifier asking specifically if FDA would agree with a safety determination that CBD is grass, we have done an independent and exhaustive review looking at all of the data that's available on CBD, and we find that CBD does not meet the general recognition of safety standard. So now I'd like to transition a bit, and as I mentioned in the beginning, talk about, well, what are the factors, what has happened that's kind of impacted our program? As we look at the processes and the programs in place to ensure the safety of all foods, we find these to be robust. And they apply to all food additives, whether they be sweeteners, preservatives, packing materials, and they should apply to CBD as well. So what has happened that's changed the landscape? The first thing that happened was the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018, referred to as the Farm Bill. First, it removed hemp from the definition of marijuana. CBD is one of the major cannabinoids present in hemp. Second, it directed the USDA to issue regulations and guidelines concerning hemp products. And finally, it maintained that marijuana, that is versions of cannabis plants with greater than 0.3% delta 9 THC under Schedule 1 of the CSA and is still regulated by DEA. So what about the FDA? Well, it's important to note that the Farm Bill preserved FDA's authorities as it relates to cannabis products and CBD. This includes, in addition to just what we painstakingly went through earlier, scientific and regulatory support for the potential therapeutic uses. So that would mean drugs, regulations of CBD products marketed as foods or dietary supplements or cosmetics. And so then it's important to note that products containing CBD are subject to the same authorities and requirements as FDA regulated products containing any other substance. CBD needs to meet the same standards, safety standard and data requirements for all other food additives. And it's the responsibility of manufacturers to ensure products that enter the market are safe and they are in compliance with regulations. In addition to realizing I missed a critical point that I wanted to make back a few slides ago when we talked about whether or not CBD is a food additive. We said CBD is an unapproved food additive. In addition to the data to demonstrate safety and the review that's gone on to recognize that CBD does not meet the general recognition of safety standard, there is an exclusion portion of the FD&C Act referred to as 301LL. And 301LL specifies that any substance that has been approved as a drug cannot be added to food. And so because Epidiolex has been approved as a drug, which CBD is the main active ingredient within Epidiolex, CBD is precluded from being added as a food additive. So a bit more about cannabis. So cannabis is a plant that contains dozens of naturally occurring compounds known as cannabinoids. These are THC and CBD are the most well known, but there are others. These cannabinoids is a family of compounds that are generally unique to cannabis. They're not largely found in other plants. They can occur at different levels in different parts of the plant, as well as in different cultivars that have been cultivated by growers to selectively increase or decrease cannabinoids, such as THC or CBD. Some of these compounds can be synthetically produced. As I just mentioned, FDA has approved a product containing CBD called Epidiolex, and there have been no other approvals for CBD by FDA, not in foods or in dietary supplements. So earlier, I mentioned certain statutory exclusions to the definition that would not allow CBD to become approved as a food additive. I mentioned that the Act states that a substance that has been approved as a drug or publicly studied as a drug cannot be added to human or animal food or dietary supplements. The section of the Act that pertains to food is called 301 LL and applies to all substances. Because of 301 LL, the Act stipulates that an approved drug should not be present in food. This directly applies to CBD because it is the active ingredient in the drug Epidiolex. So I mentioned previously that FDA has conducted a review of the available data and has determined that a level of CBD has not determined a level of CBD that can be considered safe for use in food. A review of the data has identified concerns for safety. These include hepatotoxicity or liver injury effects, male reproductive toxicity, drug-drug interactions, GI distress, and effects on mood and alertness. These effects in food are concerning, and FDA has determined that CBD is not grass when added to food and is an unapproved food additive. FDA has issued a number of warning letters to industry since the passage of the Farm Bill. These warning letters include references to certain sections of the Act, such as the drug exclusion section 301 LL, which I described earlier. Also, FDA has tested a number of products and found that in many cases, the CBD content do not match the amount on the label, and some far exceed or do not contain CBD at all. So what are we doing now? First off, we have a special internal working group called the Cannabis Product Council that includes various experts from across the agency, including experts from drugs, cosmetics, vet meds, foods, to continue to assess the available information and to tackle this issue. There was a specific blog post that's been posted on this topic, and there's a public docket that's been open so that the public can share information directly with the agency. We are continuing to monitor the marketplace and conduct research and provide education. We have specific research going on to get additional information for some of the safety signals that we've seen, and continue to put a large amount of effort into this area. Also not directly related to CBD, but important to mention that there are other components of hemp that have been considered by FDA as it relates to their safety of use in foods. There have been 3 specific GRAS notices, one for hemp seed oil. These are substances that are directly derived from the seed parts of the plant. The seed parts of the plant generally do not naturally occur cannabinoids, including CBD or THC, and these have been evaluated for their identity and the safety for these specific products. Hemp seed oil is used as a substitute for other edible oils, generally comprised of fats and fatty acids. Hemp seed protein powder is used as a source of protein. It generally comprises 30 to 65% protein, and dehulled hemp seed is for use as an ingredient, generally comprised of fats, proteins, and lesser amounts of fibers and carbohydrates. FDA has reviewed the available data and for these and has issued a no questions letter about the notifier's conclusion that they are GRAS for the intended use. The full details for these individual GRAS notices are available on our website, and you can take a look. As I mentioned earlier, generally cannabinoids, including CBD and THC, are not generally part of hemp seeds, but we do acknowledge that during harvesting or manufacturing, there could be some crossover contamination of those cannabinoids. And for those reasons, we ask manufacturers and industry to employ reasonable practices to keep cross-contamination at de minimis levels. And additional work is going on to establish what those practices actually should be and what those limits should be to make sure that there is no concern for any crossover contamination that could occur in these products. And then one more before I close. I wanted to provide a hot off the presses consumer update that was released yesterday as it relates to concerns for Delta 8 THC. So in the Farm Bill, it specifically excluded Delta 9 THC and provided a limit above which any cannabis containing above that amount would not meet the definition of hemp. Did not specifically call out Delta 8 THC, and we are beginning to see Delta 8 THC appear on the marketplace. Delta 8 THC is a psychoactive substance found in the cannabis plant and in both marijuana and hemp as a minor constituent. And there are certain things we want consumers to know about these products. First, they've not been evaluated or approved by FDA for safe use. And we're seeing ways that they're marketed that may put the public health at risk. We have received several adverse events that are particularly concerning involving Delta 8 THC containing products. We do believe, and the data does show, that it has psychoactive and intoxicating effects, and it may not be marketed as such. And Delta 8 products, although it is a naturally occurring, it seems that predominantly this is being synthetically derived, and it may involve the use of potentially harmful chemicals to create the concentrations of Delta 8 that are claimed in the marketplace. As I noted, it's a relatively low level constituent. Delta 8 products should be kept out of the reach of children and pets. I would note, as a consumer, not as a federal regulator, I would not recommend that my family or friends avail themselves of these products for the concerns that have been noted. So I will open it to questions. I think I have one or two more slides, but I'd like to leave it here because we think it's very important that people understand how to report complaints in cases of accidental exposure or adverse events, as it may relate to Delta 8 THC or any products that you, for which you experience an adverse event. You can call FDA and put in a consumer complaint and talk with a consumer complaint coordinator. There's an electronic voluntary MedWatch form and also a paper voluntary MedWatch form. And we would encourage you to have this information and share it whenever appropriate. So with that, I'll thank you for your time and take any questions.
Dr. Jacobs, we did have one question so far, and it was asked early on, so you may have addressed it. The question was, assuming hemp oil is also looked at the same as CBD is, are there any differences on grass for hemp oil?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, we are seeing the terminology within the marketplace is evolving. We've seen full and broad spectrum hemp extracts and hemp oils. I think what's important to note is whether or not these are CBD or THC containing substances, or do they intend to address, as I had mentioned earlier, hemp seed oil and hemp seed products for which there has been a GRAS determination. There has been not a GRAS determination made for CBD products, whether that be represented as a full spectrum hemp or a broad spectrum hemp, which in the data that we've seen tend to be used to represent a CBD containing product. But I would really advise people look at the label more closely. But from what we have, the data and information that we have is that full and broad spectrum hemp are tending to be used in the marketplace to represent products derived from hemp that do contain cannabinoids, including CBD.
Awesome. We've got another question. Is pet food treats is pet food or treats regulated in a similar manner?
Oh, I'm not an expert on pet food. That is done through the Center for Veterinary Medicine. I do know that the 301LL exclusion, which says any substance that has been approved as a drug, that cannot be added to human foods and it cannot be added to pet foods as well. So that exclusion would apply. I am not aware, and I can barely say with fair certainty that there has not been an approval for these products in pets. And if I wish I had the language in front of me, but I do believe that FDA has said that these should not be used in pets for pet foods and treats.
Okay, I'm seeing about 3 more questions. Mary Barbie asked, does the hemp seed have to be dehulled?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, the terminology that is used, let me say first, I'm not 100% sure whether or not the hold versus the dehold and what would the level of cannabinoids be. I think what's more important to do is to look at the specifications for any product that you may be considering using in your food manufacturing process to ensure that the specifications and the identity match with what's been evaluated by the GRAS notice. And if it hasn't, to consider preparing a GRAS review of your own, and you can consult with the agency on whether or not it would require a separate GRAS determination. The terms that are used in the GRAS notices are those that have been provided by the notifier. Our subject matter experts really dig into the data and look at the data and the identity of the substance itself, and the naming just tends to be the convention as was provided by the GRAS notifier.
Okay. It says currently the legal limit for THC content in foodstuffs in Canada is 10 ppm. If we use the 2018 Farm Bill definition for hemp plants, 0.3% THC, this is 3,000 ppm. US is currently using the limit from hemp plant for food. This is wrong. When will a US limit for food be available from FDA or from USDA?
So the Canadian regulatory system is distinct from the US, and there are some different approaches that they take. They do have some regulations as it relates to natural products from cannabis. That's probably more aligned with how we would look at it for food. They also have products for medical use for cannabis. And so the limits for cannabinoids of THC and CBD would be different. As we are reviewing the data, we may determine what safe level in terms of a limit there would be from crossover contamination, and we are looking at what those appropriate limits would be based on good manufacturing practices. But as 301LL precludes CBD from being added to foods directly, and we have not determined what level it could be safe for use in foods, we maintain that CBD is an unapproved food additive when added to food and does not meet the definition for GRAS as defined under the Act.
So I'm going to combine a couple of different questions now because they're similar. They're saying, you know, like they have questions about CBD on the market for consumers now in things like gummy bears, oils, etc. Are these approved? Someone else said they saw them in pet food treats. Someone else said, you know, they're seeing that the CBDs in drinks and foods everywhere. They have warning letters going out. What's next, and how long are they going to be warned? Gave you a lot there, so.
Yeah, you know what I'm hearing in a lot of those questions, I think, is a lot of the same concerns that we hear from stakeholders and constituents, which is I think hopefully what I've done clearly here is demonstrate that CBD has not been approved as a food additive and does not meet the standard for grass. So based on that, it should not be added to foods. There is no legal regulatory pathway that we see where CBD would be appropriately added to foods. So what about all of these products that are on the market? FDA has issued a number of warning letters, and FDA is continuing to monitor the market. It is the responsibility of responsible industry to comply with regulations and ensure that the products that they put on the market meet the standard for safety and are in compliance with regulations. As I'm not working for the industry, I have a lot of the same questions. All I can do is convey the way FDA sees these issues.
We have a question. What does it mean when a product is sold as weed light, L-I-G-H-T, or diet weed?
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'm going to put this slide up if I can. I've been having a little bit of trouble here. It's throwing me off a little bit. So these products that I referred to at the very end relate to what we have seen and what the consumer update that we put out yesterday related to Delta 8 THC. Delta 8 THC, we see marketed as weed light. Oh, goodness. And we have concerns for those products.
Awesome. And these are the last two questions here. Is CBN treated the same as CBD, CBN?
CBN. So as I mentioned on the slide where we talked about the cannabis plant, cannabinoids are a broad class of compounds that are generally naturally occurring in cannabis plants, including marijuana and hemp. THC is the cannabinoids that differentiates cannabis that would meet the definition of marijuana. All of the other cannabinoids could be naturally occurring in hemp. For any cannabinoid to be added to food, it should either meet the definition of generally recognized as safe, or it should be submitted to FDA for review and consideration as a food additive. CBD has been evaluated for use as a drug. CBN is a minor cannabinoid that may be present, that is present in some varieties of cannabis plant. We have not evaluated the data on CBN, and no one has submitted a notification or petition to us on the CBN cannabinoid.
One last question, and then maybe we can answer the rest maybe later. And if you'll stay around to answer maybe one or two questions in the chat later during the break. This question is, what if state law defines additive differently than FDA?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that question. I think that there is definitely, we've seen, especially as it relates to marijuana, some state laws that deviate from the FDA official position on those products. Standards and specifications for these products vary from state to state. And I would say that is a challenge.
Absolutely. Dr. Jacobs, wonderful presentation. Thank you for coming and joining with us today. And definitely a lot of information for us to take in. I'm going to